Picture a flat Indiana highway in the middle of a Monday afternoon. Corn on both sides, pavement stretching ahead, nothing but blue sky and silence. Nothing obviously wrong. Nothing that would make you slow down or look twice. This is a state where people vanish off trails, out of bars, from the middle of a walk they've made 100 times before, and no one has any answers. 10 people, 10 places across Indiana. Some were never found. Some were found too late. None of it was explained. Get a map. Lock the door. Let's get into the first case. If you're new here, subscribe. We cover cases like these every single week. February 13th, 2017, started as the kind of day that doesn't feel dangerous. It was a Monday, and in Carroll County, Indiana, a stretch of flat farmland about 70 miles north of Indianapolis, schools were out for a winter break. The temperature was unseasonably mild for February, the kind of softness in the air that feels like a gift after weeks of cold. It was the kind of day that makes you want to go outside, be somewhere, do something you wouldn't normally do in the middle of winter. Nothing about that morning, the light, the temperature, the routine quietness of a small Indiana county with nowhere important to be gave any indication of what was coming before sundown. Abigail Williams was 13 years old. People who knew her described her as warm and artistic, the kind of kid who made friends easily and genuinely cared about the people around her. She liked the outdoors. She liked being outside in the woods and the fields that define that part of Indiana, the flatness of it, the quiet. Liberty German Libby, to everyone who knew her, was 14. She was tech-savvy and active on Snapchat, and almost never without her phone. She had a habit of documenting her days the way her generation did. A quick photo here, a short video there, small evidence of being somewhere and being happy about it. That Monday, the two girls made plans to spend the afternoon hiking the Monon High Bridge Trail, a converted rail trail that winds through the woods above Deer Creek on the edge of the small town of Delphi. Delphi is the kind of place where everybody knows everybody. The population sits just above 3,000 people. The Monon High Bridge Trail was not a tourist attraction, it was a local spot. The kind of place Delphi residents used for afternoon walks and weekend outings. Not the kind of destination that attracted visitors from outside Carroll County. Parents knew the trail. Kids walked it routinely. Teachers and coaches walked it. Elderly couples walked it on Sundays. It felt safe in the way that familiar places feel safe, not because anyone had formally evaluated the risk, but because nothing bad had ever happened there before, and nothing bad had ever happened there before, and that has always been enough, until it isn't. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Libby's older sister Kelsey dropped the two girls off at the trailhead on County Road 300 North. The plan was simple. They'd walk the trail, take some photos, and be picked up by 3 o'clock. Kelsey drove away. The girls headed toward the bridge. Libby had her phone out from the start. She was photographing the hike as they went the tree line, the old weathered boards of the bridge deck stretching ahead of them, Abby standing with her back to the camera against a bright winter sky. That last photograph she took of Abby, with the wide gray sky behind her and the old bridge planks running out toward the far tree line, was released publicly in the days after the girls disappeared. It became one of the most recognizable images in Indiana true crime history. Abby looks completely at ease. There is no tension in her posture, no awareness of anything wrong. Ordinary afternoon, ordinary Monday, an ordinary walk on a trail they'd been on before. Here's the critical detail. Somewhere on that bridge, Libby's phone began recording. Not an intentional video, the phone captured something without her meaning to start it. What it caught was a man approaching the girls from behind. The footage shows him from a distance. Stocky build, blue jeans, a dark jacket, hands buried in his pockets, walking toward them with a quiet and unhurried confidence. He does not look like he is rushing. He does not look like he is confused about where he is. He looks like a man who knows exactly where he is going and what he intends to do when he gets there. And then audio. His voice, low and flat, delivering what sounds unmistakably like a command. Guys, down the hill. 3 words. That was it. And then the recording ends. The girls were supposed to be at the pickup point by 3 o'clock. When they didn't appear, Libby's grandfather and family members began searching the trail and the surrounding area. As the afternoon turned into evening and evening into full dark, Carroll County activated a full missing persons response. Search teams worked through the night, moving through the woods along Deer Creek, calling out names, sweeping the brush on both sides of the trail with flashlights. The bridge, which had felt so ordinary 10 hours earlier, stood dark and empty above the cold creek. The next morning, February 14th, 2 bodies were discovered in a wooded area near the banks of Deer Creek, roughly 1 mile from the point on the bridge where Libby's phone had been recording. The manner of their deaths was ruled homicide. Indiana State Police withheld specific cause of death details as part of active investigative protocol, a decision that would carry legal significance throughout the years-long investigation that followed. This is where it stops being normal and becomes something else entirely. Think carefully about what that gap represents. 2 girls, 13 and 14 years old, on a trail they knew in a town where they knew everyone. A man on a bridge who issued them a command while Libby's phone was running. And then nothing. No screams reported. No witnesses coming forward. No one who saw or heard anything that seemed alarming until search teams found their bodies a mile away the next morning. Carroll County is rural, but it is not empty. The Monon Trail was not deserted that afternoon. Other people had been out there earlier in the day. The killer walked into those woods with 2 girls and then walked back out in the middle of a Monday afternoon, in a community small enough that most residents recognized their neighbors on sight. Nobody came forward with anything concrete, not until it was already far too late. On February 15th, Indiana State Police held a press conference and released the single grainy still image captured from Libby's phone, the figure on the bridge, hands in pockets, moving toward the camera. They also released a short clip of the audio. That voice, those 3 words. The image quality was poor. The figure was identifiable only in broad physical terms: height, build, clothing, color. But the audio was clear enough to leave something in you after you heard it. Something about the flatness of the voice, the control in it, the absence of urgency. It was worse, somehow, than if he had been shouting. The reward fund for information grew quickly, eventually reaching $230,000. National media picked up the case within days. The FBI became involved. Delphi became the center of every true crime discussion in the country. And still for months, and then years, there was no arrest, no named suspect. The image was shared hundreds of thousands of times. The audio clip played on broadcasts and podcasts and YouTube channels and living room TVs across America. The case simply would not close. In April of 2019, more than 2 years after the murders, Indiana State Police held another press conference. They released a new composite sketch of the suspect, one that looked notably different from the grainy bridge image, alongside a new audio recording. And then they made a statement that sent a specific kind of chill through everyone who had been following the case. The suspect, they said, was hiding in plain sight. He was local. He knew that trail. He had very likely been in Delphi or the surrounding area the entire time, walking past the roadside memorials that had been placed for Abby and Libby, shopping at the same stores as their families, living a completely ordinary life. But here's what doesn't make sense in the worst possible way. Police had spoken to the killer in 2017. Richard Matthew Allen was 50 years old, a pharmacy technician who had worked at the CVS store in Delphi and who had lived in town since 2006. He was quiet and unremarkable, the kind of man who could stand behind a counter for years in a small town without leaving a strong impression. In 2017, when investigators were conducting interviews of anyone who might have been near the trail that Monday afternoon, Allen told police he had been there. He said he had walked the bridge for about 2 hours, watching the fish in the creek below. He was interviewed, his name was documented, and he was apparently not flagged as a significant person of interest. And then life continued, for him, for 5.5 years. In October of 2022, Richard Matthew Allen was arrested on 2 counts of murder. The probable cause affidavit revealed evidence that had never been made public: an unspent .40 caliber cartridge recovered near the bodies in 2017. That cartridge matched a gun owned by Allen. Investigators had been holding that detail close for years, and combined with additional work done over the course of the investigation, it had finally crossed the threshold. Allen entered a plea of not guilty. In November of 2024, a LaPorte County jury found Richard Allen guilty of both murders. In December of 2024, he was sentenced to 130 years in prison, the maximum available under Indiana law. And that's the last confirmed moment anyone knew Abby and Libby were alive. The photograph Libby took of Abby on the bridge, wide sky and worn wooden planks, maybe 10 or 15 minutes before Libby's phone captured the voice of the man who would kill them both. For 5.5 years, that man handed over prescriptions and said, "Have a nice day," and went home to Delphi. The audio clip played on every platform in existence. Nobody made the connection. Not until 2022, nearly 2,000 days after those 3 words were recorded on a bridge above Deer Creek. The next case, the killer may have been even closer. And the victim vanished while being watched on surveillance camera, just blocks from her own apartment, in a lit college town full of people on a warm June night. No body has ever been recovered, and 15 years later, no one has been charged. Bloomington, Indiana sits in the rolling hills of Monroe County in the south-central part of the state, about an hour south of Indianapolis. It is a college town in the truest sense. Indiana University pulls in roughly 45,000 students, and the downtown that wraps around the campus is built for them. Bars, apartments, pizza places, coffee shops, all packed into a few walkable blocks. In the warmer months, the streets stay alive until 3 or 4 in the morning. Everyone knows everyone, at least by face. It is the kind of place where a 20-year-old girl in a white top and black leggings can walk home from a friend's apartment at 4:30 in the morning and feel like she is still in the middle of civilization. It is the kind of place where the distance between where you are and where you need to be is never more than a few blocks. Lauren Spearer grew up in Scarsdale, New York, an affluent suburb north of Manhattan in Westchester County. She was 20 years old, a sophomore at Indiana University studying textiles merchandising. She was 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighed 95 pounds. She was social, well-liked, and active in the Jewish community on campus the previous spring break. She had traveled to Israel to plant trees on behalf of the Jewish National Fund. She had a boyfriend named Jesse Wolf, whom she had met years earlier at a summer camp in Pennsylvania called Camp Towanda, the same place where she had met much of her social circle at Indiana University. That overlap, friends from camp, friends from the dorm, friends from the bar, created a tight social web that would become significant in the investigation, because almost every person who was with Lauren in her final hours had known her, or known someone who knew her, for years. She had a circle of friends at Indiana University, most of them connected through that same camp. She was, by every account, someone people gravitated toward. Her mother, Charlene, later described dropping Lauren off for her freshman year, feeling completely at ease, no concerns, no reservations. "I didn't have any qualms about saying goodbye," she said. Bloomington felt safe. Indiana University felt like the right place. She also had a darker edge to her life in Bloomington that her family only came to understand fully after she disappeared. 9 months before she vanished, she had been arrested for public intoxication. After she disappeared, investigators found a small quantity of cocaine in her apartment. The picture that emerged from the investigation was of a young woman who had become involved in a campus party scene that included heavy drinking and drug use. Not unusual for a college sophomore in a college town, but significant in terms of understanding the night she disappeared and the people she was with. The night of June 2nd into the early hours of June 3rd, 2011 followed a path that surveillance footage and witness accounts were later able to partially reconstruct. Lauren had started the evening at her apartment in the Smallwood Plaza complex on the edge of downtown. At 12:30 in the morning, witnesses reported she left her apartment with a friend named David Rohn. The pair went to the apartment of a student named Jay Rosenbaum, where Lauren met up with another student, Corey Rossman, who lived in an adjacent unit. At 1:46 in the morning, surveillance footage captured Lauren entering Kilroy's Sports Bar on Kirkwood Avenue. Kilroy's was a well-known Indiana University bar, a staple of downtown Bloomington's nightlife. Lauren had entered using a fake ID. She was 20, and the legal drinking age in Indiana is 21. By witness accounts, she had already been drinking heavily before she arrived. At 2:27 in the morning, surveillance footage captured Lauren and Corey Rossman leaving Kilroy's together. Here's the critical detail. When Lauren left Kilroy's at 2:27, she did not take her cell phone with her. She did not take her shoes. Both items were left behind at the bar, her phone sitting somewhere inside, her shoes gone from her feet entirely. Investigators later confirmed this through the bar itself and through witness accounts. A former FBI agent who reviewed the case noted that the detail about the shoes, combined with witness descriptions of her behavior that night, gave some indication of how compromised she was at the moment she stepped back out into the street. Think about what that tells you about her condition in that moment. This is a young woman who is 4'11" and weighs 95 pounds, leaving a bar in the early hours of the morning without her shoes and without her phone, with a man she had been drinking and reportedly using drugs with for much of the night. From Kilroy's, Lauren and Rossman walked toward Smallwood Plaza, where her apartment was. The distance was small, a few blocks through lit downtown streets, a route Lauren had walked many times. At approximately 3:30 in the morning, witnesses placed the two of them at Smallwood Plaza in a hallway on the 5th floor of the building. Multiple male students were present in that hallway. Some of those students later became witnesses in the investigation, but several of them were not interviewed by Bloomington police until after the semester had ended and students had already left campus for the summer, a delay that investigators and the Spearer family's private team would later criticize sharply. And that's the last confirmed time anyone saw Lauren Spearer alive. At approximately 4:30 in the morning on June 3rd, Lauren was seen one final time at the intersection of West 11th Street and North College Avenue in Bloomington, still walking with Rossman. That corner is roughly 4 to 5 blocks from her apartment. 4 to 5 blocks on a lit street in a college town at 4:30 in the morning. She never made it home. When Jesse Wolf woke up later that morning and sent Lauren a text, the reply came back from a bar employee someone at Kilroy's had found her phone and answered it. Jesse reported her missing. Lauren's parents, Robert and Charlene Spearer, arrived in Bloomington by June 5th. They would not leave for over 2 months. Now this is where the case turns dark, not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. In August of 2011, investigators conducted a 9-day search of the Sycamore Ridge landfill near Pimento. South of Terre Haute, the facility where trash collected from Bloomington was ultimately deposited. The Bloomington Police Department, Indiana University Police, and the FBI all participated. They found nothing. Divers had already searched Lake Monroe, the large reservoir on the edge of Bloomington. Nothing there either. By May of 2013, investigators had received more than 3,000 tips. The FBI remained involved. A private investigator hired by the Spearer family, a former FBI agent named Brad Ciravalo, was brought in as early as September 2011. What he found when he arrived was a case that had already lost critical time. Ciravalo was blunt about it in later interviews. Bloomington Police Chief Michael Dieckhoff, he said, had made clear that he was not interested in outside help and would not share information with the family's investigative team. Ciravalo noted that some neighbors in the area of Smallwood Plaza had not been approached by police for 10 days after Lauren disappeared, despite police records claiming nearby residents had been interviewed the day after she vanished. Students who had been in the hallway on the 5th floor of Smallwood Plaza the night Lauren disappeared left Bloomington for summer break before receiving anything more than cursory interviews. Some had lawyers by the time investigators made real attempts to reach them. A wall had gone up, and it went up fast. But here's what doesn't make sense, or rather, what makes a very specific kind of sense. Corey Rossman was with Lauren from at least 2:27 in the morning until at least 4:30, the last confirmed sighting. He was at the 5th floor hallway. He was at the intersection of 11th and College. And then, according to the account his lawyer later provided, his memory simply stops. The statement that entered the public record was stark. His memory, his lawyer said, stopped when they left Kilroy's and resumed when he woke up. A nearly 2-hour window, including the last confirmed sighting of Lauren Spearer, simply blank. The people in that 5th floor hallway, several of whom retained lawyers early in the investigation, have never been charged with anything. In April of 2015, Bloomington police announced they were looking into a possible connection between Lauren's disappearance and the murder of another Indiana University student, Hannah Wilson, who had gone missing on April 24, 2015, also after a night at Kilroy's. Wilson's body was found near Plum Creek. A man named Daniel Messel was convicted of her murder in 2016. Investigators looked at whether Messel had any connection to the Spearer case. No link was ever confirmed. In January of 2016, the FBI and local agencies searched a property on Old Morgantown Road in Martinsville, about 20 miles north of Bloomington, connected to a man named Justin Wagers, who faced separate charges involving stalking and indecent exposure. Cadaver dogs hit on something in a barn on the property. Anthropologists conducted a dig and sifted the dirt. They found nothing. The truck registered to Wagers was towed for examination. No charges related to Lauren were ever filed. In 2024, journalist Sean Cohen published a book titled College Girl Missing, having spent years interviewing people connected to the case. The book documented new witness accounts and detailed the contradictions in the evolving statements of the men who were with Lauren that night. As of June of 2026, 15 years after Lauren disappeared, the Bloomington Police Department reported that the case was not cold. 23 new tips had been received in the prior year. Nearly 1,000 supplemental reports had been generated over the life of the investigation. Her parents, Robert and Charlene, posted on the anniversary, "We will never stop searching for answers as long as we live and breathe." No body, no charges, no explanation for what happened in those 4 or 5 blocks between the corner of 11th and College and Smallwood Plaza. Lauren Spearer's shoes are still at Kilroy's in everyone's memory. A tiny figure, no shoes, no phone, heading into the dark from the door of a bar at 2:27 in the morning. That is the last surveillance image of her that exists. After that, there are witness accounts, and then there is a corner, and then there is nothing. Lauren Spearer vanished with people around her. The next case, a woman disappeared on a Sunday afternoon, doing the most ordinary errand imaginable, and the man police suspected from the very first week went on to become a sworn police officer. Without ever telling his department that he was the prime suspect in a woman's disappearance, he was indicted for murder, and on the same day he was indicted, he was dead. Richmond, Indiana sits in Wayne County in the far eastern edge of the state, about 1.5 miles from the Ohio border. It is a small industrial city around 35,000 people built around manufacturing, a regional hospital, and Earlham College. It has the feel of a town where people know their neighbors, where Sunday mornings follow a predictable rhythm of church and errands and family, where the worst thing that should happen on a July afternoon is that the laundry takes longer than expected. It is not the kind of place where people disappear. Marilyn Renee, Nicole McCown, Niqui, to everyone who loved her, was 28 years old in the summer of 2001. She was the youngest of 10 siblings, and her family described her as the kind of person who lit up every room she walked into, always smiling, always looking for fun, always making the people around her feel like they mattered. She worked as an accounting clerk at a state correctional facility, and she was studying at Sinclair Community College in Dayton, Ohio, with a goal of becoming a United States Marshal. She had a 9-year-old daughter named Peyton from a previous relationship, a little girl who adored her mother and who later described their goodbye rituals with the kind of specific detail that only children remember. The way they would always take pictures together on the first day of school, the way Nikki held her hand walking through the door. She was engaged to be married. Her fiancé was a man named Bobby Webster. The wedding was 3 weeks away. She also had a secret one that her family suspected, that her sister knew about, and that Nikki had chosen not to resolve before the wedding. For some period of time before her disappearance, Nikki had been seeing another man, a co-worker at the prison named Tommy Swint. Her sister knew about the relationship and had warned her repeatedly to end it. Nikki had not. Whether that secret had anything to do with what happened to her on July 22nd, 2001 is officially unknown, but it became central to everything that followed. That Sunday started the way Sundays in a city like Richmond often start: unhurried, domestic, the kind of morning that belongs entirely to routine. Nothing about it felt like a hinge point. Nothing about it felt like the last ordinary day a family would ever have. Nikki went to church in the morning. Her fiancé Bobby was elsewhere, meeting with his best man at a tuxedo shop to finalize details for the wedding. The afternoon stretched ahead of them both, ordinary and unhurried. Nikki decided to take care of the laundry. She drove to the Richmond Coin Laundry on the 1100 block of Southeast Street and started a load. At some point during the afternoon, 2 men at the laundromat began harassing her. The nature of the harassment was not fully described in public reporting, but Nikki was shaken enough by it that she left the laundromat and drove directly to her mother's house to tell her what had happened. She said she was afraid to go back. Her mother heard her out, and then Nikki left her mother's house and returned to the laundromat anyway. She needed to finish the laundry. The wedding was 3 weeks away. There were things to do. Here's the critical detail. At 3:19 in the afternoon, surveillance footage from a village pantry convenience store near the laundromat captured Nikki walking in, getting change for the laundry machines, and walking back out. She looks calm in the footage. She looks like a woman with errands to finish. She walks out the door and out of frame. That is the last confirmed image of Nikki McCown that exists anywhere. She did not come home that evening. Bobby reported her missing. Her 9-year-old daughter, Peyton, started the 3rd grade that August without her mother there to take her picture in front of the school. Peyton's aunt held her hand at the door instead. The investigation that followed produced multiple suspects, years of dead ends, and no resolution. It also produced one of the most quietly disturbing threads in Indiana cold case history, a man who remained the prime suspect in a woman's murder for nearly a decade while continuing to live a professional life in law enforcement in a state just across the border without anyone stopping him. Bobby Webster's behavior in the days after Nikki's disappearance raised immediate questions. Rather than postponing the wedding, he canceled it entirely the day after she vanished. He called Sinclair Community College to ask for her unused tuition back, and became upset when told it was being paid by her employer rather than directly by her. He tried to return his wedding ring to the jeweler. The store refused, because Nikki had purchased it, and her name was on the receipt. He told investigators he needed the money to search for her and to buy a cell phone. Investigators asked him to take a polygraph test. According to investigators, he failed it. The result was not publicly released at the time, and Bobby has maintained that he was never shown the results and that the characterization was unfair. The investigation around him continued for some time, generating significant attention in the early days of the case, before focus shifted elsewhere. Bobby has said he was never shown the results and disputed the outcome. He was eventually dropped as a suspect. Now this is where the case turns dark in a different direction entirely. Tommy Swint, Nikki's secret second relationship. The co-worker from the prison had been a person of interest since the earliest days of the investigation. Police found evidence that connected him to Nikki's disappearance, though the specifics of that evidence were not fully made public. What is known is that Swint was considered the primary suspect, and that knowledge apparently never left Wayne County law enforcement. What is also known is that it apparently never reached anyone else, because in 2007, 6 years after Nikki McCown disappeared, Tommy Swint was sworn in as a police officer with the Trotwood Police Department in Trotwood, Ohio. He had not disclosed to the department that he was the prime suspect in a woman's disappearance. He lasted less than 2 months. When the department discovered his status in the investigation through their own background processes, not through any disclosure from Swint, they gave him a choice between resigning and being terminated. He resigned. But here's what doesn't make sense, or rather what makes a terrible kind of sense. On November 3rd, 2001, more than 3 months after Nikki disappeared, her car was found in the parking lot of the Meadows of Catalpa apartment complex in Dayton, Ohio. Dayton is about 45 minutes from Richmond. The car was not in good condition. The battery was missing. The stereo had been removed. The door lock had been knocked in. The ignition switch had been tampered with. It looked, by all outward appearances, like a car that had been stripped and abandoned. But when investigators looked inside, they found something that has never been fully explained. Nikki's laundry was inside the car, folded. The laundry she had gone back to the laundromat to finish. The laundry she had been afraid to go back and retrieve after 2 men frightened her. It was in the car, neatly folded, as if she had finished it and put it away before something happened. But the surveillance footage showed her at the convenience store getting change for the machines, which suggests she had not yet finished when that footage was taken. The timeline doesn't reconcile cleanly. Either she finished the laundry after the last footage of her and then something happened on her way out, or someone else moved the car and the laundry to Dayton afterward. The Meadows of Catalpa was the complex where Nikki's ex-boyfriend lived, the father of her daughter Peyton, Stephen Johnston. His apartment, his building, his parking lot. Investigators obviously looked at him immediately. He provided an alibi for the afternoon she disappeared, submitted to a polygraph, and passed it. He was cleared as a suspect. He was investigated, provided an alibi for the day she disappeared, passed a polygraph, and was cleared. In November of 2003, skeletal remains were discovered near Spencer, Indiana. Investigators submitted samples for DNA comparison against Nikwi's family. The results were inconclusive. Nikwi is still officially listed as a missing person, not a confirmed homicide victim, even though virtually everyone involved in the investigation has stated publicly that they believe she is dead and that foul play was involved. Her remains have never been officially identified. Her case remains open. In February of 2010, a Wayne County grand jury indicted Tommy Swint for Nikki's murder. Investigators had, by that point, connected physical evidence to him, a fingerprint found on tape at a location connected to the case, among other details that were referenced but not fully released. The indictment represented the culmination of nearly 9 years of investigation, the closest the case had ever come to resolution. On February 3, 2010, the same day the indictment was handed down, Tommy Swint was found dead at his home in Alabama. He had committed suicide. The family of Nikki McCown, who had waited 9 years for an arrest, learned about the indictment and the death on the same day. There would be no trial. There would be no cross-examination. There would be no moment in a courtroom where someone had to answer for what happened to Nikwi on that Sunday afternoon in Richmond. Her daughter Peyton was interviewed by Dateline NBC years later. She spoke about the first day of 3rd grade, about her aunt holding her hand at the school door, about knowing in that moment that something was wrong because her mother was always the one who did that. "I always felt loved by her," Peyton said. She had spent her entire childhood and much of her adult life without answers. As of 2024, Richmond police are still conducting searches of wooded areas in Wayne County. New detectives have taken on the case. They believe someone in the community has information that has never come forward. Nikki's siblings have kept billboards active. There are people out there, the investigators say, who know something. The laundry was folded. The car was 45 minutes away. The man who was indicted for her murder was dead before he could be tried. And Nikwi McCown is still officially missing, which means, in the language of the case files, that she is still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. The next case takes us back even further. 1966, when 3 young women drove to a beach on Lake Michigan on a summer Saturday, walked into the water in front of an entire crowded shoreline, and were never seen again. No bodies, no trace, nothing left behind but their towels on the sand. If you've been watching this far, hit subscribe. We go this deep on every case. There is a version of Indiana Dunes State Park that exists in postcards and family photo albums, and in the childhood memories of everyone who grew up within driving distance of the southern shore of Lake Michigan white sand beaches. Curving along the southern shore of Lake Michigan, steep dune ridges rising behind them, the water stretching north toward Chicago until it disappears into the horizon. On a clear summer Saturday, the park draws thousands of people, families with coolers, couples with towels, kids running into the surf. The water is cold even in July, and the undertow along the southern Lake Michigan shore has a reputation among locals strong, unpredictable, capable of pulling even experienced swimmers off their feet and dragging them out faster than they can fight it. But that reputation has never stopped anyone from going in. The pull of the water on a hot July day is stronger than any warning. And in 1966, before the park posted the systematic caution, signs, and advisories that exist today, most visitors simply waded in and trusted their own judgment about how far to go. July 2nd, 1966 was a Saturday, and the beach at Indiana Dunes was crowded. Among the people who drove to the park that afternoon were 3 young women from the Chicago suburbs, Ann Miller, Patricia Blow, and Renee Brule. The 3 were friends, all from the Westchester, Illinois area on the western edge of Chicagoland, young women with their whole lives ahead of them, the kind of friends who drive to the beach together on a summer Saturday without giving it a second thought. Their exact ages are not fully documented in available public records. The specific ages of each of the 3 women have been described inconsistently across the historical reporting on the case, though all 3 appear to have been in their late teens or early 20s at the time of their disappearance. They had driven out to the dunes for a summer beach day, the kind of outing that happens 1,000 times on 1,000 summer Saturdays, all along the southern Lake Michigan shoreline, without incident, without drama, without anyone ever thinking twice about it. They found a spot on the sand, laid out their belongings, and at some point in the afternoon, they walked down to the waterline and went in. They did not come back. Their belongings remained on the beach: towels, shoes, whatever they had brought with them spread out on the sand the way beach belongings look when someone intends to return in a few minutes. Bystanders noticed eventually. Lifeguards were alerted. People on the beach began looking toward the water, scanning the surface, calling out. The sun was still high. The beach was still full of strangers. By the time a formal search began, there was no sign of the three women anywhere, not in the water visible from shore, not on the beach, not on the paths leading back to the parking area. Ann Miller, Patricia Blow, and Renee Brule had simply ceased to exist in the middle of an afternoon on a crowded public beach. Here's the critical detail. What followed was one of the most extensive search and rescue operations the Indiana Dunes had ever seen. Law enforcement from multiple agencies, the United States Coast Guard, volunteer dive teams, and civilian search parties mobilized within hours of the alarm being raised. Police, the United States Coast Guard, volunteer divers, and civilian search teams worked for over a week. The search area expanded to a 6-mile circumference around the point on the beach where the women had last been seen. Boats dragged the lake. Divers went down. The shoreline was walked in both directions for miles, and nothing was found. Not a body, not a piece of clothing, not a single physical trace of any of the three women anywhere in or around Lake Michigan. This is where it stops being an accident and becomes something harder to explain. Lake Michigan drownings, while tragically common along the southern Indiana and Illinois shoreline, almost always produce bodies eventually. The lake is cold enough to inhibit decomposition for extended periods, which typically means victims surface rather than sink permanently. Recovery operations along this stretch of shoreline have, historically, located victims, sometimes days later, sometimes weeks later, but located. The lake is cold enough to inhibit decomposition for extended periods, and the currents along the Indiana shoreline, while powerful, do not typically carry victims irretrievably beyond the reach of search operations. 3 adults entering the water together in the same location on the same afternoon, with none of them recovered, not during the week-long search, not in the days and weeks that followed, not across the months and years after that, falls well outside the statistical pattern of what drowning along this shoreline normally produces. But there is another detail from that afternoon, a detail reported by multiple witnesses, and it is the one that has kept this case from ever fully closing, even across nearly 6 decades. Witnesses on the beach that day reported seeing 3 young women matching the description of Ann, Patricia, and Renee, aboard a small boat near the shore, in conversation with a young man. The man was described as being in his early 20s, with dark, wavy hair, wearing a beach jacket. He was operating the boat. The women appeared to be talking to him. No one reported anything alarming about the interaction. The scene, as witnesses described it, looked entirely ordinary. 3 women at the edge of the water, a young man in a boat, a brief conversation. Nothing that would have made anyone watching from the beach think to write down a name or a registration number, or describe the boat in any useful level of detail. No one recorded the name of the boat or its registration. The man was never identified. No one who remembered him from that day was ever able to provide enough detail for investigators to locate him. Whether he had anything to do with the women's disappearance, or whether he simply happened to be a young man on a boat who spoke to 3 strangers on a summer afternoon, has never been determined. When investigators widened the search to include the possibility that the women had left the beach voluntarily or been taken from it by water rather than lost in the surf, they found nothing that allowed them to conclusively determine what had happened. The boat, the man, and any connection they might have had to the 3 missing women remained and remain entirely unresolved. Chicago police, in the days immediately following the disappearance, put forward a theory that caused significant pain to the families involved: that the 3 women had simply run away, left their belongings on the beach, and chosen to disappear voluntarily, perhaps with the young man on the boat. The families rejected this immediately and forcefully. There was no reason, they said. No warning signs, no conflicts, no indication that any of the three women had any intention of vanishing. The theory was never supported by any evidence and was eventually set aside, but not before investigators had spent time pursuing it, and not before it had been reported in the press, framing three missing women as runaways in a way their families found deeply unfair. The investigation widened in subsequent weeks. Investigators looked as far as California. National bulletins were issued. The case received coverage across the Midwest and beyond. The families of all three women gave interviews. They pushed back against the idea that the women had run away, and they pushed for continued investigation. Some of that pushing lasted for years. It produced nothing actionable. The Indiana State Police tip line remained open, and still nothing. No sightings, no contact, no trace. Now this is where the passage of time becomes its own kind of dread, because this is not a case that faded because it was obscure or because the families stopped pushing. This is a case that faded because there was genuinely nothing to find. 57 years passed. Ann Miller, Patricia Blow, and Renee Bruhl were never found. In February of 2023, NBC News and Dateline ran a full retrospective on the case, one of the most significant pieces of national media attention the disappearance had received in decades. The Indiana State Police confirmed that the case remained active. The Westchester Police Department maintained a separate tip line. In 2024, the Crime Junkie podcast dedicated a full episode to the case, documenting the history in detail and generating renewed public attention. New tips came in following the episode. None has yet produced a breakthrough. But here's what doesn't make sense, and what has never made sense across nearly 6 decades of investigation. 3 adult women, a crowded public beach, a populated lake on a summer Saturday, massive, week-long, multi-agency search efforts that turned up absolutely nothing. If they drowned in the surf, bodies should have surfaced or been recovered during the search, or found along the shoreline in subsequent days or weeks. If they left the beach willingly, someone should have seen them go, and they should have eventually surfaced somewhere in the years that followed. If the man on the boat was involved in something criminal, he left behind no trace whatsoever. 3 people, 3 sets of personal belongings left on the sand of a public beach. And then, absolute silence, no confirmed sightings anywhere, no remains recovered anywhere, no credible leads in nearly 6 decades of intermittent investigation. In a world where almost every disappearance eventually produces some physical trace somewhere, a piece of clothing caught on a fence, a bone found in a field years later, a witness who finally decides to talk, the Indiana Dunes case has produced nothing across all of that time. Just silence and open water. Their towels are the image that stays with you, not a dramatic crime scene, not a trail of evidence. Just 3 sets of personal belongings sitting on the sand of a busy beach, while everyone around them packed up and went home. The sun went down. The park emptied. The belongings were still there. And wherever Ann Miller, Patricia Blow, and Renee Bruhl were by that point, they were not coming back for them. 3 sets of belongings, left on a beach that was full of people all afternoon. Everyone else picked up their things and went home. Ann, Patricia, and Renee never came back for theirs. The Indiana Dunes took 3 women and left absolutely nothing behind, not a body, not a clue, not a single thread of physical evidence across nearly 60 years. The next case moves forward in time by 50 years, to a city street in Kokomo, Indiana, in the fall of 2016. A teenage girl was seen on a convenience store surveillance camera at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. She was alive. She was with a man police would spend the next 6 years trying to charge with her murder. And the reason it took 6 years, and the reason it still didn't end in a conviction, is one of the most infuriating institutional failures on this entire list. Kokomo is a city of about 40,000 people in Howard County, in north-central Indiana. It has the bones of a manufacturing town, auto parts plants, a deep history tied to the steel and rubber industries, the kind of flat Midwestern grid of residential streets and corner stores where people know their neighbors by name and life moves at the pace of shift changes and school pickups. It is not the kind of place that generates national true crime attention. In the entire history of the city, there have been only a handful of unsolved disappearances. Karina McClurkin became one of them on October 11, 2016. And what happened to her in the years that followed is a story not just about one woman, but about the specific ways a case can fall through every crack in the system at once. Karina McClurkin was 18 years old. She was a black woman, 5 feet 4 inches tall, 130 pounds, curly black hair, brown eyes, a tattoo on her right forearm. She had struggled with substance abuse issues in the period before her disappearance, and she had been spending time with an older crowd that her family was worried about. Her grandmother, Jerry McClurkin, was the person closest to her. The two of them had a ritual. Whenever they said goodbye, they would hold hands, and they would both cry almost every time. Karina had a 3-year-old niece who would later be named after her. She was 18 years old, and her family loved her completely and worried about her constantly, which is a combination that produces a specific kind of helplessness when something goes wrong, and the people responsible for finding answers do not seem to be in any particular hurry. On the evening of October 11, 2016, surveillance footage from a village pantry convenience store on the south side of Kokomo captured Karina, a 57-year-old man named Flint Vincent Farmer, and a third individual together inside the store. They left the store at approximately 10:32 in the evening. Multiple witnesses later told police they had seen Karina at Farmer's apartment in the 1000 block of South Washington Street that same night. Those witnesses described hearing sounds through the walls of Farmer's apartment, a woman and a man in what sounded like a physical struggle, followed by sounds of distress, followed by a quiet that felt wrong. Sounds, witnesses said, of a woman being hurt, and then silence. Karina's mother reported her missing on October 13th, 2 days after the last confirmed sighting. When she made the report, she told police specifically that Karina may be in danger and that she believed Karina was possibly with Flint Farmer. Police went to Farmer's apartment that same day. He let them in. He looked around. He told them he had seen Karina outside near an alley, but that she had never come inside. He said she had been with another woman and had asked him for money, and that he had turned her away. Investigators noted his statement and left. Here's the critical detail. Multiple witnesses had already told police, or would tell police in the days that followed, that this account was false. Multiple witnesses placed Karina inside Farmer's apartment on the night she disappeared. Multiple witnesses described hearing what sounded like a fight. Police had the name of a specific suspect on the day the missing persons report was filed. They had a specific location. They had witnesses who contradicted that suspect's account of that night directly. And they had a mother standing in front of them, telling them her daughter was in danger. Flint Farmer was not arrested. And Flint Farmer was not arrested. Not that day. Not for 6 years. This is where it stops being a disappearance and becomes something else, an institutional failure so direct, so documented, and so prolonged that the person who ultimately had to say the quiet part out loud was a grandmother. Jerry McClurkin knew from the beginning what had happened and who had done it, and she spent years watching authorities move at a pace that made no sense to her, given everything the witnesses had already said. She did not stay quiet, and she did not accept the pace of the official investigation without protest. The family hired private investigators, 4 of them, over the course of the years that followed, each one brought in to push on leads that the family felt the Kokomo police were not pursuing aggressively enough. She gave interviews. She kept Karina's name in front of the public at a time when national media showed little interest. She made the comparison explicitly and without softening it. Other missing women in the surrounding area, women who were white, women from different economic backgrounds, received sustained media attention and visible investigative urgency, while Karina's case stayed local and underfunded and out of the national conversation because of her race and age and the situation. Jerry told Dateline NBC, "No one seems to care." That interview ran while Karina was still missing, before anyone knew where she was or what had happened to her. The case moved slowly through the years. In 2018, investigators began reviewing phone calls that Farmer had made while he was incarcerated on an unrelated drug dealing charge. He had been jailed from November of 2016 through November of 2018. Those calls, investigators said, contained statements that were significant enough to advance the investigation, but The specific contents of what Farmer said during those recorded conversations were never publicly released, leaving the family and the public aware that something damaging had been uncovered, without being able to know what it was. The investigation continued to develop, quietly and without any public-facing momentum. In the years between 2018 and 2022, the family kept pushing. The private investigators kept filing reports. Jerry McClurkin kept talking to anyone who would listen. The Kokomo police, for their part, have said they pursued every lead that came in, but for a family that believed the right answer was visible from the very first night. Every year that passed without an arrest felt like an answer in itself. But here's what doesn't make sense, and what the family had been saying for years. In June of 2022, nearly 6 years after Karenna disappeared, investigators searched Farmer's garage. They found trace amounts of blood in 3 separate areas of the structure. Samples were sent to the Indiana State Police Laboratory for analysis. On July 18, 2022, the Kokomo Police Department announced that a warrant had been issued for Flint Vincent Farmer on 1 count of murder. He was arrested that afternoon at a residence on South Purdom Street. The department noted that additional arrests might be forthcoming, a detail that has never been followed up publicly. The following day, July 19th, investigators from the Kokomo Police Department, Indiana State Police, and the Howard County and Miami County Coroner's offices converged on a rural area in Miami County, roughly 40 miles north of Kokomo. They had received information the precise nature of which the department has never publicly disclosed that led them to a specific location in that rural stretch of Miami County. What they found there were skeletal remains. Those remains were transported to Fort Wayne for forensic examination. On August 5, 2022, DNA testing confirmed that the remains belonged to Karenna McClurkin. She had been in that rural field for nearly 6 years. Now this is where the story takes one final, devastating turn, because in most cases on a list like this, the discovery of remains and the arrest of a suspect represents a kind of resolution, even if it's an incomplete and painful one. That is not what happened here. Flint Farmer went to trial. The case against him rested on witness testimony, the phone call recordings from his jail stint, the trace blood found in the garage, and the circumstantial evidence that placed Karenna in his apartment on the night she disappeared. It was not a case built on direct physical evidence connecting Farmer to the remains themselves. The 6 years between the night Karenna disappeared and the day her remains were found in Miami County had made that kind of forensic connection extremely difficult to establish. On May 8, 2025, a jury found Flint Vincent Farmer not guilty of murder and not guilty of voluntary manslaughter. He walked out of the courthouse a free man. Karenna McClurkin's remains had been found in a field in Miami County. The man police had believed was responsible had been acquitted. No other arrests have been made. The case, in the formal language of the law, is officially unsolved as to criminal responsibility, which means that a woman's skeletal remains were recovered from a field, and no one has been found legally accountable for how they got there. Jerry McClurkin, who had spent years fighting to get anyone to take her granddaughter's disappearance seriously, who had stood outside search sites and given interviews and never stopped pushing, had now watched the only man ever charged walk free. And that's the last confirmed moment anyone accounted for Karenna. A grainy village pantry surveillance frame from 10:32 on a Tuesday night. A young woman with a tattoo on her right forearm, buying things at a convenience store with a man who would one day be charged with her murder and then acquitted of it. 6 years passed between that footage and the arrest. 9 years have now passed since she disappeared from a convenience store parking lot on a Tuesday night in Kokomo. Her niece, who bears her name, has grown up in those 9 years, and no one has been convicted of anything. The Kokomo Police Department has said their investigation remains active. As of 2025, no further arrests have been announced. Hit subscribe if you want to go deeper on cases like this, new episodes every week. Karenna McClurkin was found. Her name was confirmed. Her family had to drive to a search site and wait while investigators sifted through a rural field in Miami County looking for pieces of her. And no one has been held responsible. The next case takes us back to 1986, to a smaller and quieter corner of Indiana Fayette County. East Central Indiana, a rural stretch of farmland and gravel roads where a high school senior with a full scholarship to college left her house on Good Friday morning to retrieve a forgotten purse from a party the night before. A high school senior with a full scholarship to college left her house on Good Friday to retrieve a forgotten purse from a party the night before. She asked multiple friends to go with her. She asked her sister. Nobody was available. She went alone. Her car, a cream-colored 1981 Buick Regal, was found later that day, locked and abandoned on a remote gravel road she had no obvious reason to be on. She was never seen again. 34 years later, a man who was dying confessed to her murder. Then, before he died, he took the confession back. Her body has never been found. Connorsville is a small manufacturing city in Fayette County, in the east-central part of Indiana, about 75 miles southeast of Indianapolis, and not far from the Ohio border. It sits in a part of the state where the land flattens out into farm fields, and the roads between towns are often gravel, lined with fence posts and old tree lines. The kind of quiet agricultural landscape where a car can sit at the edge of a road for hours without anyone driving past to notice. In the spring of 1986, Connorsville was the kind of place where a high school senior with good grades and a full scholarship was on her way out, not because the town had failed her, but because she had done everything right. And doing everything right in a small Midwestern city in 1986 meant you were heading somewhere else. You worked hard, you got accepted somewhere, and you left for somewhere bigger. Denise Flum was 18 years old. She was a senior at Connorsville High School, a member of the National Honor Society, a four-sport athlete competing in volleyball, basketball, softball, and track. She had already been accepted to Miami University in Ohio on a track scholarship and was planning to study microbiology. Her mother Judy described her the way people describe someone who never gives you reason to worry. Scary smart. She just had everything going for her. She was not the kind of kid who ran away. She had no reason to. She had everything lined up in front of her, a future she had worked hard to earn, and a family that loved her, and a spring break ahead, and a life that was about to get bigger. On the Thursday night of spring break, Good Friday Eve, March 27th, 1986, Denise attended a bonfire party at a farmhouse on the outskirts of Connorsville. She stayed late, had a good time, and at some point in the evening she set her purse down somewhere and forgot to pick it up when she left. She woke up Friday morning at her family's home and realized it was missing. The purse was still at the party house, sitting wherever she had set it down the night before. It was a small, entirely ordinary problem with a simple solution. A Friday morning errand. A quick drive. A quick retrieval. Back home before noon. She asked her friends if any of them could come with her to go back and get it. Nobody was free. She asked her sister. Her sister couldn't make it either. So Denise decided to go alone. She left the house without her ID, without her contact lens case, without her contact lens cleaning solution. Small details that her family and investigators would later point to as evidence that she had absolutely no intention of going anywhere other than that farm and back home. She was just going to drive a few miles, pick up a purse, and come home. It would take 20 minutes. At approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a friend reported seeing Denise at the Fashion Bug clothing store on 30th Street in Connorsville. That friend would become the last person to report a confirmed sighting of Denise Flum. She appeared normal. She appeared completely fine. She was just a girl running an errand on a Friday afternoon in a small Indiana city, exactly what she had been doing her entire senior year of high school. Here's the critical detail. Between 12:30 and 1:15 that same afternoon before the Fashion Bug, sighting a farmer near the crossroads hamlet of Glenwood, east of Connorsville, noticed a cream-colored 1981 Buick Regal parked alongside Tower Road, a remote gravel road cutting between farm fields. The car was locked. There was no sign of a crash, no flat tire, no mechanical failure. It was simply parked there on a road that Denise had no obvious reason to be traveling on, and it had been there long enough for the farmer to notice it as unusual. That car was registered to Denise's parents. Think about that timeline for a moment, because it matters more than almost anything else in this case. Her car is found abandoned on Tower Road between 12:30 and 1:15 in the afternoon, but a friend sees Denise at a clothing store in Connorsville at 2 o'clock. One of those timings is wrong, or someone moved the car while Denise was still alive somewhere else. Neither explanation has ever been resolved. Denise never arrived at the party house to pick up her purse. The tenant of the farm where the party had been held confirmed she never came. A boy who had found her purse drove to her family's home to return it that afternoon and missed her by about an hour. She never came home. Her parents reported her missing that evening. Investigators went to Tower Road. They found the locked Buick exactly where the farmer had described it, on a gravel road. No signs of trouble, just sitting there. Denise was not in it and was not near it. This is where it stops being a confusing Friday afternoon and becomes something that has never stopped being investigated. Investigators in 1986 made an early call that would haunt the case for years. They classified Denise as a potential runaway. There was no evidence to support this. She had a loving home, a full scholarship, a track team waiting for her, a future she had spent years building toward. She had left without her ID and without her contact lens supplies, not the profile of someone who had planned to leave and not come back. But the runaway classification slowed the initial response, cost days that could not be recovered, and set a tone for how the investigation was conducted in the months that followed. The family pushed back on this characterization immediately and forcefully. There was no reason for Denise to run. There was every reason for her to come home. Investigators eventually acknowledged that the classification had been a mistake, but the damage to the early investigation had already been done. As the months became years and the years began to stack up, the case developed in directions no one had anticipated. In late 1994, a man named Larry Dwayne Hall was arrested in Illinois on suspicion of attempted kidnapping and brought to the attention of law enforcement agencies across Indiana and the Midwest. Hall was a janitor from Wabash, Indiana, quiet, socially withdrawn, deeply strange in ways that people around him had noticed for years. The son of a gravedigger who had grown up in a household defined by death, and when investigators searched his van, they found it stocked with a deeply disturbing collection of materials: maps, ether, photographs, and newspaper clippings about missing and murdered women from across the region. Among the clippings were articles about Denise Flume. Hall was questioned about her disappearance. He confessed to killing her. Then he recanted. Then he confessed again. Then he recanted again. Hall was eventually convicted of the abduction and murder of 15-year-old Jessica Roach, whose body had been found in a cornfield in Fountain County, Indiana, in 1993, and was sentenced to life in a federal psychiatric prison in North Carolina, where he remains today. He was never charged in connection with Denise's disappearance. Investigators said the evidence against Hall in her case was too thin. They could not place him in Connorsville on March 28, 1986, with sufficient certainty to support a charge. He had confessed and recanted too many times for the confessions alone to hold legal weight. But here's what doesn't make sense, or rather, what makes a certain kind of terrible sense in retrospect. In July of 2020, 34 years after Denise disappeared, Fayette County investigators received an unexpected development. Sean McClung, Denise's ex-boyfriend from high school, was in jail on 2 unrelated charges and was dying of a terminal illness. He confessed to killing Denise. The confession came with conditions. McClung wanted immunity from prosecution for Denise's death and dismissal of the 2 unrelated charges in exchange for his full cooperation. Investigators agreed to the terms, and then McClung refused to tell them where Denise's body was. The immunity agreement that had been offered to McClung required full disclosure, full cooperation, full information, including where Denise's remains could be found. By withholding the location of the body, McClung violated the terms. He voided the agreement himself. He was charged with voluntary manslaughter in connection with Denise's presumed death. It was the first time in 34 years that any formal legal action had been taken in the case. And then, in September of 2020, just months after the confession, Sean McClung died of his illness at the age of 56. Before he died, he told his lawyer that the confession had been a lie. He had made it up, he said, because he wanted to get out of jail before he died and had hoped the confession would be enough to get him released. He maintained his innocence until the end. And that is where the case has remained ever since, suspended between 2 recanted confessions, a car on a gravel road, and a woman who left home one Friday morning without her contact lens solution and never came back. Two men confessed to killing Denise Plum at different points across 3.5 decades. Both confessions were recanted. Neither man led investigators to a body. Hall died in a federal prison, still legally cleared of her death. McClung died months after his confession, claiming it had never been true. The Justice for Denise Plum Facebook page has drawn more than 12,000 followers over the years, people from Connorsville and far beyond it, who have refused to let the case go quiet. The Crime Junkie podcast dedicated a full episode to her case. The Fayette County Sheriff's Department tip line remains active. Her purse was returned to her family's front door that Friday afternoon. Someone had found it at the party house and driven it over. Denise missed them by about an hour. The purse came home. She never did. Wherever Denise Plum is, no one has been able to find her in nearly 4 decades of searching. Denise Plum's killer, whoever that person is, has never faced legal consequences. A man confessed on his deathbed and took it back. Another man confessed to investigators during his murder trial for a different victim and was never charged. The next case takes us to Marion, Indiana, a small city in Grant County in the north-central part of the state, and to a Monday evening in March of 1993. A 19-year-old college freshman stepped out of her dorm room to walk half a mile to a grocery store. She bought a root beer and a magazine. She was seen leaving the store. Her bloody clothes were found in a park 100 feet off her route 2 days later. She was never seen again. And a suspected serial killer led investigators to the place he said he had buried her, and there was nothing there. Marion, Indiana, is a small city of about 28,000 people in Grant County, in the north-central part of the state. It is a place with a complicated and sometimes painful history, a manufacturing hub that has weathered decades of economic contraction, a community defined by its churches and its university, and by the particular closeness of small Midwestern cities where everyone exists within a few degrees of everyone else. Indiana Wesleyan University sits on the north side of the city, a small conservative Christian institution with a tight campus culture and a student body that, in 1993, was largely drawn from religious families across the Midwest. The campus was compact enough that everything felt close together: the dormitories, the classrooms, the small cluster of businesses along the adjacent streets. A half-mile walk from a dorm room to a store was nothing, a 10-minute round trip. The kind of errand that students made constantly without any thought about safety or timing or who might be out there on an ordinary Monday evening. Students made that walk all the time, alone, in the evening, without thinking twice about it. Tricia Lynn Reitler was 19 years old. She was a freshman psychology major, enrolled on an academic scholarship, and she was already training to join the university's track team. She had grown up in Olmsted Township, Ohio, a quiet community southwest of Cleveland, about 4.5 hours from Marion by car, in a conservative Christian family. Her parents, Gary and Donna, described her as deeply faithful and fiercely independent, headstrong in the best possible way, a young woman who was absolutely certain she could handle herself. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall, with brown hair and blue eyes, and she wore a small unfinished tattoo on her left ankle, a silver ring, and a leather strap necklace with a watch. Her roommate, Belinda Berry, later described her as someone who liked to do things alone, who was confident about her ability to take care of herself. Her younger sister Melissa had chosen Indiana Wesleyan specifically because Tricia was there. The plan was for Melissa to enroll the following fall, and the two of them to room together. Melissa had already been offered a scholarship. She never took it. On the evening of Monday, March 29, 1993, Tricia was in her dorm room in Bowman Hall, working on a term paper. At some point in the early evening, she decided to take a study break. She was working on a term paper. Her roommate Belinda knew she was in the room, and the decision to step out for a few minutes was entirely spontaneous, the kind of small decision that gets made 1,000 times a day on 1,000 campuses without incident. The walk to the Marsh supermarket, actually a reliable drugstore on the corner of 45th Street and Adams Street, a detail that has sometimes been reported inconsistently, was approximately half a mile from the campus. It was a well-traveled route, on lit streets, in a small city. She had made the walk before. She left around 7:45 in the evening. At approximately 8 o'clock, Tricia was seen at the store. She purchased a Faygo root beer and a magazine. Store records and witnesses confirmed the purchase. She was seen leaving the store, heading back in the direction of campus, alone. It was approximately 8 in the evening. The walk back to Bowman Hall should have taken her 10 minutes. That purchase of Faygo root beer and a magazine is the last confirmed record of Tricia Lynn Reitler anywhere. Here's the critical detail. Adjacent to the route between the store and the Bowman Hall dormitory was Saybold Pool and Center Elementary School. In the field near the pool, 2 days after Tricia disappeared, investigators found her clothing, her blood-stained jeans, her shirt, and her shoes. They were in a field that was, by some accounts, approximately 100 feet off the route she would have been walking. Her watch, her silver ring, and her leather-strap necklace were not found with the clothing. They have never been recovered. Think about what was happening in that park at the moment Tricia disappeared. According to investigators, somewhere between 6 and 7 unidentified people were playing basketball in the school playground adjacent to Saybold Pool at the time she would have been walking past. 6 or 7 potential witnesses, people who were outside, in the open, within a very short distance of whatever happened to Tricia Reitler, and not one of them has ever come forward with information about what they saw or heard that night. In 30-plus years of investigation, those people have never been publicly identified. When Tricia didn't return to Bowman Hall, her roommate Belinda called Tricia's parents in Ohio. Gary and Donna Reitler drove through the night in cold rain to Marion. "It was the longest drive of my life," Gary said later. "It was drizzling. It was cold. I guess that was the start of a 30-year journey." Police initially faced a problem that would slow the investigation significantly. They had bloody clothing. They had a missing student. But they had no body, no confirmed crime scene, and limited physical evidence. The stance taken in the early days was stark and, to the Reitler family, incomprehensible. At the time, police said they did not have a case to investigate as a homicide until they had a body. Bloody clothes in a park and a missing girl were not, in the formal investigative framing of that moment, sufficient to constitute a crime scene. That framing cost momentum that could never be recovered. The first hours and days of a disappearance are the most critical window for evidence collection and witness canvassing, and those days moved past without the full weight of a homicide investigation behind them. Days passed, then weeks. This is where it stops being a missing persons case and becomes something much darker. In April of 1993, investigators conducted a large-scale search near Fowlerton, Indiana. Several items of potential evidentiary interest were found and submitted for forensic testing. None matched Tricia. A skull was discovered beneath a railroad trestle in Marion about a year after her disappearance. But forensic examination confirmed it belonged to a much older woman and had no connection to the case. The investigation gathered tips, followed leads, and arrived at the same wall, again and again. Then, in late 1994, a name that will already be familiar from the previous case in this list entered the picture again. Larry Dwayne Hall, the janitor from Wabash, Indiana, the man who had confessed to and recanted the murder of Denise Plum, was arrested in Grant County on suspicion of attempted kidnapping. When investigators searched his van, they found something that stopped them cold. Inside the vehicle were maps, ether, photographs, and newspaper articles and clippings about missing women. Among the materials specifically connected to Tricia Reitler, photographs of her, maps of the Marion area, and articles about her disappearance. Hall was questioned extensively. He confessed to kidnapping and killing Tricia Reitler. He said he had buried her body near the Mississinawa Reservoir in Grant County. Investigators took him there. They dug. They searched the area thoroughly. They found nothing at all. The ground around the Mississinawa Reservoir was searched thoroughly in the area Hall had indicated. No remains, no disturbed earth consistent with a burial. Nothing. Hall recanted his confession in Tricia's case, just as he had recanted in Denise Plum's case, just as he had recanted in the cases of several other missing women across Indiana and Illinois. In June of 1995, Hall was convicted of the abduction and murder of 15-year-old Jessica Roach and sentenced to life in a federal psychiatric prison. Marion police attempted to pursue charges in Tricia's case, but concluded the evidence was insufficient. We've had a number of suspects over the years, one being Larry Hall. Marion Police Deputy Chief Stephen Dorsey said in 2018, "We just don't have any evidence that puts Larry into the mix of Tricia being missing." But here's what doesn't make sense, and what has haunted investigators and the Reitler family for over 30 years. Hall's van contained specific documentation about Tricia, her photograph, maps of the area around Indiana Wesleyan University, news articles about her disappearance. This is not something that can be easily explained away by a man who simply followed crime news. He had operational materials connected to her specifically. He led investigators to a burial site and said she was there, and then she wasn't. The investigation into his possible role in her disappearance was conducted seriously and at length, and it arrived at nothing that could be taken to a prosecutor. Either Hall lied about the location, moved the burial site in his telling, obscured it deliberately, or someone else moved her. Or Hall had nothing to do with it and simply had detailed materials about her case for reasons that have never been satisfactorily explained. Another suspect, a former Indiana Wesleyan student named Tony Searcy, was investigated in 1994 while serving a prison sentence on unrelated theft charges. Searcy denied any involvement and pointed to Hall as the responsible party. He was never charged. Marion police have maintained, as recently as 2023, that Tricia's case is an active and ongoing investigation. A $1,000 reward remains in place. The tip line at Marion police is still open. Gary and Donna Reitler have continued to speak publicly about their daughter for 3 decades, giving interviews, attending anniversary events, and pushing for continued investigative attention. Their stamina across 30-plus years of uncertainty is the kind of thing that is difficult to describe from the outside. I would tell myself, I could do this for one more day, Donna said in 2023. Never ever imagining 30 years later we would still be here. Tricia's sister Melissa never attended Indiana Wesleyan University. The dorm room the two sisters had planned to share together stayed empty. 6 or 7 people were playing basketball in a park 30 feet from where it happened on a Monday evening in March. 30 years have passed. None of them has ever said a word publicly about what they saw or heard that night. Tricia Reitler walked half a mile to a store and was never seen again. The next case takes us northwest to LaPorte, Indiana, in the same year, 1993. A 16-year-old girl finished her afternoon shift at a veterinary clinic and was seen arguing with 2 men in the parking lot just after 6 o'clock. Her car was found abandoned on a back road that same night. Her jacket was found in a tree. A month later, a 14-year-old girl out fishing with her family pulled at something near the edge of a pond off Range Road and found her. And over the 30 years that followed, 3 different men were connected to her death. 1 convicted, 1 dead, 1 never charged. And a book published in 2025 argues that the wrong man is in prison. LaPorte is a city of about 20,000 people in LaPorte County, in the far northwest corner of Indiana, about 60 miles east of Chicago, tucked into the flat lake plain between the Indiana Dunes shoreline and the Indiana farmland that stretches south and east from it. It is a quiet city, the kind of place that does not make national news, where a crime from 1993 can echo for 30 years in a community small enough that almost everyone knew someone who knew Raina Rison. It is a small regional hub surrounded by farmland and scattered ponds, the kind of place where people live their entire lives within a few miles of where they were born. Pine Lake Veterinary Hospital sat on the suburban edge of town, the kind of quiet, low-traffic small animal practice where a teenager could pick up afternoon shifts and learn the work she was convinced she wanted to spend her life doing. Raina had not taken the job because she needed money. She had taken it because she wanted to be there. In the spring of 1993, it was where Raina Rison spent her afternoons. Raina Lynn Rison was 16 years old. She was a sophomore at LaPorte High School, bright and talented by every account, passionate about animals, and determined to become a veterinarian. She worked part-time at Pine Lake Animal Hospital not just for the money, but because she genuinely wanted to be there, around the animals, learning the work. A music scholarship was later established in her name at the high school. She had a boyfriend named Matt Elser whom she was close to. She had a circle of friends. She had a future she was building deliberately, one after-school shift at a time. On the surface, she had everything a 16-year-old in a small Indiana city should have. The surface, in this case, was hiding a great deal. But Raina also carried something that no 16-year-old should ever have to carry: Her brother-in-law, a man named Raymond McCarty, who was married to her older sister Lori, had been sexually abusing her since she was approximately 10 years old. When Raina was 11, she became pregnant as a result of that abuse and terminated the pregnancy. McCarty was identified as the father. He was charged and sentenced to 3 years of probation for child sexual molestation. He served probation. He was released. And in January of 1993, just 10 weeks before Raina disappeared, McCarty was released from a subsequent jail term on a related charge. He was back in the community. He was back in proximity to Raina. And Raina had told people that McCarty had threatened to kill her if she ever spoke about what he had done. She had spoken. He had been convicted and served probation, not prison, probation, and then served additional jail time on a related charge. And now, in January of 1993, he was out again, back in LaPorte County, back within reach of the family he had already destroyed in the most intimate possible way. On March 26, 1993, Raina worked her regular 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock shift at Pine Lake Animal Hospital. At approximately 6 in the evening, witnesses in the parking lot saw Raina outside the clinic, engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument with 2 males in a car. The identities of those 2 men were not definitively established in the immediate aftermath of her disappearance. When Raina's boyfriend Matt Elser arrived at her parents' home around 7 o'clock to pick her up for a date, she wasn't there. He called the clinic, no answer. He drove to Pine Lake Animal Hospital. The building was locked. Raina was gone. Her parents reported her missing to LaPorte City Police at 10:30 that evening. Here's the critical detail. That same night, Raina's vehicle was found abandoned on County Road 200 East, north of US 20 in LaPorte County, a rural back road with no obvious connection to her normal route home from work. Her Letterman jacket was found separately, in a tree nearby. Not on the ground, not dropped in a rush, in a tree. The positioning of the jacket has never been explained. For 31 days, Raina Rison was missing. Search efforts were conducted. Her family and the LaPorte community pushed for answers. The investigation looked at everyone who had been in proximity to her in the days before she disappeared, her boyfriend, her co-workers, the men who had been seen arguing with her in the parking lot, her brother-in-law. None of it produced an arrest. On April 26, 1993, a 14-year-old girl named Tracy was out fishing with her family near a small pond off Range Road, north of US 20. Approximately 2 miles from central LaPorte, she found something near the water's edge. It was Raina. Her body had been submerged in the pond, covered by a log and branches. She was still fully clothed. The LaPorte County coroner determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation. She had been strangled. There was no evidence of sexual assault. The body was badly decomposed after a month submerged in a pond, which severely limited the forensic evidence that could be extracted from the scene and from the remains. The decomposition was one of the factors that would complicate the prosecution of every suspect who followed. This is where it stops being a disappearance and becomes a murder with 3 decades of contested truth. Suspicion fell on Raymond McCarty almost immediately, and from the perspective of Raina's family, it never really moved away from him. He had a documented history of abuse against Raina. He had made threats against her. He had been released from jail just 10 weeks before she died. He gave investigators changing and inconsistent statements in the days following the discovery of her body. A search warrant was executed on his home. An autopsy found a significant concentration of isopropyl alcohol in Raina's system, a chemical consistent with industrial solvents used at the metal foundry where McCarty worked. He was investigated extensively. He was never charged. Then, as the investigation broadened, a name familiar from the previous 2 cases on this list entered the picture. In November of 1994, when Larry Dwayne Hall was arrested in Grant County, and investigators found his van containing maps, ether, photographs, and clippings connected to missing women across Indiana and the surrounding states. LaPorte investigators traveled to compare notes with the agencies already looking at Hall. In Hall's van, they found a prescription birth control pill bottle with the name R. Rison typed on the label. Raina's family denied that she took birth control pills. The origin of that pill bottle has never been definitively explained. Whether Hall obtained it somehow after learning of her disappearance, or whether it genuinely belonged to Raina, remains disputed. Hall confessed to her murder. Then he recanted. LaPorte police concluded that Hall's timeline placed him elsewhere on March 26, 1993, and could not confirm his presence in LaPorte that night. He was not charged in her case. His confession was added to the growing list of Hall confessions that ultimately amounted to nothing legally actionable. The investigation, over the years that followed, eventually focused on a third man, Jason Tibbs, who had been Raina's ex-boyfriend during their middle school years. Tibbs had not been in a relationship with Raina at the time of her death, but witnesses would later claim he had spoken to them about what had happened to her in ways that suggested direct knowledge. Two witnesses, Ricky Hammonds and Eric Freeman, testified at trial that Tibbs had confided details about Raina's death to them in the years following the crime, details that suggested direct knowledge of what had happened to her. Investigators worked to disprove Tibbs's alibi from the night of March 26, 1993. They succeeded. In January of 2014, a LaPorte County jury convicted Jason Tibbs of Raina's murder after a trial that had come more than 20 years after the crime. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison. But here's what doesn't make sense, and what a journalist spent years trying to document. In 2025, investigative journalist Hillel Levin published a book titled Submerged: A Cold Case, An Innocent Man Condemned, and One Family's Darkest Secret. The book argues that Jason Tibbs was wrongly convicted, that the evidence pointing to Raymond McCarty was stronger than what was presented at trial, that the isopropyl alcohol in Raina's system was specifically consistent with the chemicals at McCarty's workplace, and that key forensic details were either not fully pursued or not adequately weighted at trial. The book does not claim to definitively identify the killer, but it raises sustained and detailed questions about whether the right man is currently serving a 40-year sentence for a murder he did not commit. The argument is grounded in forensic details, in the documented history of McCarty's abuse, and in what Levin describes as investigative choices that steered the case away from McCarty and toward Tibbs in ways that may not have been fully justified by the evidence. McCarty has never been charged with anything related to Raina's death. The conviction of Jason Tibbs stands as of 2025. The book and the conviction now exist simultaneously in the public record, pointing in entirely opposite directions, with no legal mechanism currently in place to resolve the contradiction. Tibbs has maintained his innocence throughout his incarceration. His legal team has used the book's findings as the basis for ongoing appeals. And underneath all of that legal machinery, underneath the decades of competing theories, and the pill bottle in Hall's van, and the isopropyl alcohol, and the witnesses, and the trial, is the foundational fact that never changes. Raina Ryson was 16 years old. She had reported the abuse. The system had processed it and returned her abuser to the community. She had been told explicitly that speaking would get her killed. She spoke anyway. And 10 weeks after the man who threatened her got out of jail, she was found at the bottom of a pond 2 miles from where she worked. A 14-year-old girl named Tracy found her. Raina had been there for a month. The log and branches that covered her body had been placed there deliberately. This was not a body that had simply drifted to the edge of a pond. Someone had put her there and covered her. The next case brings us forward nearly 30 years, away from the rural roads and pond edges of northwest Indiana, to the city of Evansville, the third largest city in the state. Sitting on the Ohio River in Indiana's southwestern corner, a 24-year-old woman named Andi Wagner disappeared on August 6, 2022. Evansville is a city of around 110,000 people, built along the northern bank of the Ohio River. It is urban in a way that the previous cases on this list were not: bigger streets, denser neighborhoods, more people moving through. And yet Andi Wagner vanished from it just as completely as Denise Flum vanished from a gravel road in Fayette County in 1986. The circumstances are different. The silence that followed is the same. Evansville is Indiana's third largest city, sitting on a wide bend of the Ohio River in the far southwestern corner of the state. It is a city of about 110,000 people, larger than anything else on this list, more urban, more anonymous, in the way that cities larger than small towns tend to be. The Ohio River runs along its southern edge, wide and brown and slow-moving in the summer heat. The streets of the West Side neighborhoods spread out from the riverfront in grids, residential blocks, corner stores, the occasional abandoned property mixed in among houses where people have lived their whole lives. It is the kind of city where a person can disappear into the fabric of daily life and not be noticed missing for days, especially if the people around her were already accustomed to her being hard to track, moving between addresses, going quiet for stretches, then resurfacing. A city that size absorbs people. It does not always notice when one of them stops showing up. Andy Madison Wagner was 24 years old. She had been born in Vernon, Texas, and had grown up between Texas and Indiana, spending time on both sides of the border between her mother's world and her father's. The kind of split upbringing that leaves a person with connections in multiple places and sometimes a firm footing in none of them. By the summer of 2022, she was living with her grandparents in the 3700 block of Stanford Drive in Evansville, a stable arrangement, at least relative to some of the years that had come before it, and one that gave her a base while she waited for the next chapter to begin. She struggled with addiction. Her family has been open about this, and it had made her life unstable in the years before her disappearance. She moved between addresses, staying in Evansville proper and in the surrounding communities of Newburgh and Oakland City. She was not always easy to find, and the people who cared about her had learned to accept periods of silence before she reappeared. That pattern would matter enormously when she vanished, because it bought the people responsible for whatever happened to her several days before anyone officially sounded the alarm. But the people who loved her knew her, and they knew one thing that mattered enormously in understanding what happened on August 6th. Andy had a concrete, specific plan that was days from coming together. Her mother had moved to Texas, to Wichita Falls, and had promised to come back to Indiana and drive Andy out before the end of August 2022. Andy talked about this. She was excited about it. Texas meant distance from the people and habits and circumstances that were making her life dangerous. Texas was a way out that was actually within reach, with a specific timeline and a specific person coming to get her. She was approximately 2 weeks away from that. She talked about it with her family. She was counting down. Texas was not a vague aspiration. It was a date on a calendar and a mother who was coming to get her. On August 6th, 2022, Andy came to her grandparents' house and spent about 10 minutes there, packing a bag. She spoke briefly to her younger sister. She said she was looking forward to the move to Texas. She did not say where she was going or who she was meeting. She left. That was the last time her family saw her. Here's the critical detail. Her family reported her missing on August 12th, 6 days after that last confirmed contact. The delay was not unusual given the patterns of her life in recent years. Her family had lived through periods of silence before, and she had always resurfaced. But this time was different, and they knew it when she failed to appear for her son. But when she did not appear to pick up her 4-year-old son from her parents, alarm spread quickly. Police located her vehicle, a gold 2006 Dodge Stratus, in the 2700 block of Lyons Avenue in the Mars Hill neighborhood of Indianapolis, nearly 150 miles north of Evansville. The car had been backed into the driveway of an abandoned home. A front tire was flat. The window was down. The keys were still in the ignition. Her purse was inside. Her cell phone was inside. Her shoes were inside. Andy Wagner was not there. She has not been seen or heard from since August 6th, 2022. The gap between Evansville and Indianapolis is not a small one. Andy's car ended up in a neighborhood she had no confirmed connection to, in a city far from where she had last been seen, with all of her belongings still inside it. The flat tire suggests the car had been parked there long enough for something to deflate or be deflated. The window being down in an unoccupied car, left in a driveway, raises its own questions. None of it has ever been explained, and the distance between Evansville and Indianapolis, roughly 150 miles of Indiana highway, has never been accounted for. This is where it stops making sense in any ordinary way, because the distance between Evansville and Indianapolis is not a gap that closes by accident. Evansville police opened a formal investigation. Detectives interviewed family members, friends, and people Andy had spent time with in the days before and around August 6th. The investigation was complicated by the same factors that had made Andy hard to track in her daily life: multiple locations, multiple acquaintances, a world that did not always keep clear records of who was where and when. They examined digital evidence, including activity from the phone she had been using. Investigators found discrepancies. A person who reported that Andy had left his residence at a specific time was confronted with phone data, suggesting her device had remained in the area significantly longer than his account indicated. Discrepancies like that do not automatically constitute evidence of a crime, but they generate serious questions about who was the last person with her and under what circumstances she left. As months passed without Andy appearing in any hospital, jail, shelter, or law enforcement database anywhere in Indiana or anywhere else in the country, investigators moved toward a conclusion that the family had already reached. The Evansville Police Department stated that foul play was suspected. A person who had been planning a move to Texas in 2 weeks, who had a child waiting for her, who had just spent 10 minutes with her sister talking about her future, that person does not simply decide to vanish. The Evansville Police Department, the FBI, and the Indiana State Police all became involved in the investigation. In May of 2024, nearly 2 years after Andy disappeared, investigators obtained and executed search warrants at 3 locations in Oakland City, Indiana, a small community in Gibson County roughly 40 miles north of Evansville. The FBI had received a tip about the locations. Officials from Evansville Police Department, the FBI, Indiana State Police, the Gibson County Sheriff's Office, Oakland City Police, and Ohio Valley Search and Rescue personnel participated in the searches. Evidence was collected from those locations and sent to the Indiana State Police Laboratory for testing. The search involved multiple law enforcement agencies coordinating on a specific property, addressed the 11,000 block of County Road 200 South near Franklin Street in Oakland City, as well as nearby sites. No public announcement about the results of that testing has been made as of the time this was written. No arrests have been made. No charges have been filed. The family, the search volunteers, and the investigators who worked the case are all still waiting for the lab results to tell them something definitive. A $5,000 reward assembled from public donations, including a $2,500 contribution from a YouTube true crime channel and a matching contribution from Haley Brummett, a family friend who became a central figure in the search, remains unclaimed. Her mother, Elaine, moved back to Indiana from Texas after Andy disappeared and has led search efforts from inside the community where her daughter was last seen. Elaine died before answers came. Haley Brummett, a friend who became part of the search effort, said it plainly. "I know she's still out there, and she's got to be found." Andy Wagner's car in the driveway of an abandoned home in Mars Hill sits in the record of this case, the way Nikki McCown's folded laundry sat in the recovered car in Dayton, and the way Denise Flum's locked Buick Regal sat on Tower Road, an object in the wrong place, with everything a person would need still inside it, and the person nowhere to be found. Indiana has a particular talent for producing these images. A car, a flat tire, a window left down, everything intact except the woman who drove it there. An object that ended up somewhere it shouldn't be, carrying all the things its owner would have needed, without its owner anywhere nearby to explain how it got there. The last case on this list takes us to Indianapolis, the state capital, the largest city in Indiana, a metro area of nearly 2 million people. On the morning of June 21st, 2015, Father's Day, a 23-year-old woman named Larissa Sam left her uncle's house in the early hours before dawn after finishing a late shift at work. She had been at the Classy Chassis, a club near the intersection of Interstate 465 and South Harding Street on the south side of Indianapolis. She finished her shift around 1 in the morning, drove to her Uncle Rusty's house on the south side of Indianapolis, had a few drinks, and stayed until around 4:30 in the morning. She was 2 days from an American Idol audition she had been planning and genuinely excited about. She posted videos of herself singing on YouTube, dreamed about music, and had told her family this audition felt like the start of something real. 2 days, she had a 4-year-old son waiting at his grandmother's house for her to come pick him up. Her car, a gold 2006 Dodge Stratus, was found backed into the driveway of an abandoned home in the 2700 block of Lyons Avenue, in the Mars Hill neighborhood on the west side of Indianapolis. The front tire was flat, the window was down, the keys were in the ignition, her phone was inside, her purse was inside, her shoes were inside, the SIM card had been removed from the phone. And Larissa Sam was simply gone, leaving behind a son who grew up asking where his mother was, an audition she never made, and an uncle who was the last known person to see her, and who died by suicide in March of 2017, 2 years after Larissa disappeared, without ever being publicly named as a suspect, and without authorities ever commenting publicly on whether they considered him one. Larissa Marie Sam was 23 years old. She had grown up between Indiana and Texas, spending parts of her childhood in both states, and by 2015, she was living in Indianapolis working, raising a son, navigating the particular difficulty of a life that had not gone entirely the way she had hoped it would. She worked as a dancer at the Classy Chassis, a club on South Harding Street near the Interstate 465 interchange on the south side of the city, situated in a stretch of highway commercial development truck stops, fast food restaurants, the kind of corridor that stays lit all night and sees a constant rotation of strangers passing through. She was not happy with the work. Her mother, Rebecca Russell, said later that Larissa had been looking at ways to get out of dancing, that she did not like the work, that she was trying to build towards something different. She had bigger things in mind. One of the things she was actively and concretely building toward was music, not as a fantasy, but as a real next step with a real date attached to it. She posted videos of herself singing on YouTube. She had applied to audition for American Idol, and the audition was scheduled for June 23, 2015. 2 days after she disappeared, she had a 4-year-old son named Marcus. She loved him with the kind of intensity that defined her. According to everyone who knew her, the videos she posted on Facebook were often the two of them together, laughing and playing and singing, doing the small, ordinary things that parents and small children do on quiet afternoons. Those videos are still out there. They are one of the only records that remains of who Larissa Sam was when she was happy. Marcus was at his grandmother's house on the morning of June 21st, waiting for Larissa to come pick him up. She never came. On the night of June 20th into the early morning of June 21st, Father's Day, Larissa finished her shift at the Classy Chassis around 1 in the morning. Father's Day. A detail that matters in the way small calendar details sometimes do, because it establishes that the streets of that neighborhood were not empty that morning, that people were home, that cars were in driveways, and that whatever happened to Larissa happened in a city that was asleep but not deserted. She drove to the home of her uncle, a man named Rusty Wagner, on the south side of Indianapolis. She stayed there for a few hours, drinking and spending time with Rusty. While she was there, she made a post on Facebook. The post said she was looking for a texting buddy, and it included her phone number. She left Rusty's home around 4:30 in the morning. Rusty later told investigators that he woke up and realized she had already left, that he had not seen her go, had not watched her walk out the door, and was not aware of her departure until she was already gone. That account has never been publicly corroborated or contradicted by anyone else who was present. That is the last confirmed account of anyone seeing Larissa Sam alive. Here's the critical detail. Police found Larissa's car, a gold 2006 Dodge Stratus, in the 2700 block of Lyons Avenue in the Mars Hill neighborhood on the west side of Indianapolis. The car had been backed into the driveway of an abandoned home. The front tire was flat, the window was down, the keys were in the ignition. Her purse, her wallet, her cell phone, and her shoes were all still inside the vehicle. The SIM card had been removed from the phone. She was not there. She has not been seen anywhere since 4:30 in the morning on June 21st, 2015. By the time her family reported her missing and police located the car, she had already been gone long enough for whatever had happened to become much harder to unravel. Now this is where the case turns dark in layers. The Facebook post, the one she made at Rusty's house in the early hours of the morning with her phone number, looking for a texting buddy, immediately caught the attention of investigators and the public. The fear was obvious. A woman posts her phone number publicly late at night, leaves a known location, and disappears. Someone who responded to that post could have been the last person she interacted with. The FBI became involved and began running down anyone who had made contact with Larissa through that post or through her phone in the hours before she disappeared. Their conclusion: after running down the contacts, there was no evidence that anyone who responded to the Facebook post had any involvement in her disappearance. That particular thread, which had seemed so significant in the early days of the investigation, led nowhere. Every lead that seemed promising was methodically closed. Other theories were pursued and similarly closed off. Investigators considered whether someone Larissa had met through work had followed her. The FBI ruled it out, no evidence connecting her disappearance to anyone at the club. They also examined the possibility of sex trafficking, given Larissa's work environment and the proximity to truck stops along the Interstate 465 corridor. They ruled that out as well, though the ruling was based on the absence of evidence rather than the presence of a definitive, alternative explanation. An extortion attempt appeared on Facebook shortly after Larissa disappeared, someone posting a demand suggesting she had been kidnapped and taken to another country. The FBI investigated and determined it was a fraudulent attempt to extort money from the family. That lead was also closed, and the family was left watching one possible explanation after another get ruled out without anything concrete being offered in its place. But here's what doesn't make sense, and what has never been publicly resolved. Rusty Wagner was the last known person to see Larissa alive. He was the person she had spent 3 hours with in the middle of the night before she vanished. He was the person who last saw her walk out his door at 4:30 in the morning. He told investigators she had left on her own. He had no explanation for why her car ended up in a neighborhood she had no confirmed connection to, with all of her belongings inside it and the SIM card removed from her phone. Very little public information about what investigators found when they looked at Rusty has ever been released. What is known and what was discovered through public records, research, and online investigative communities, rather than through official disclosure, is that Rusty had a prior conviction for rape from 1989. Investigators were aware of his background. They interviewed him. They never publicly named him as a suspect or described him as a person of significant interest in any official communication. And in March of 2017, roughly 21 months after Larissa disappeared, Rusty Wagner died. Online records and comments from people who knew him indicate the cause of death was suicide. He took whatever he knew about that night with him. No one can ask him anything now. Larissa's mother, Rebecca, refused to stop searching for her daughter, even as every formal lead investigators pursued was closed without an answer. She became one of those parents who ends up leading their own investigation because the official one has run out of visible momentum, knocking on doors, following tips, doing what police could not or would not do with the resources available. She believed Larissa had been taken, that someone who knew her, or someone who had access to her, had done something to her, and that she was being held somewhere against her will. "I believe it is someone she knows," Rebecca told Fox 59 in 2016. "I believe they have taken her for trafficking purposes." Law enforcement never confirmed that theory. The FBI had ruled trafficking out as a primary explanation. But Rebecca's belief was not simply denial. It was rooted in the specific circumstances of where Larissa had been working, the people she had been around, and a community where rumors about what had happened to her continued to circulate for years. She kept looking. Larissa's son, Marcus, grew up in the years that followed. He was 4 years old when his mother disappeared. He was placed in counseling. Family members described him asking about her, crying for her, carrying the specific kind of loss that children carry when a parent simply stops appearing one day and no one can explain why. "Marcus needs closure," a family member told a local television station. "He misses his mom very much." The Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department has confirmed over the years that the case remains active and open. A $1,000 reward through Crime Stoppers in Indianapolis has been in place for years for any information leading to answers. Investigators have said they have ruled out many people and many theories, but they have not publicly identified who they have ruled out, or why, or what remains open as a possibility. As of the time this was written, no arrests have been made. Larissa Sam has never been found. Marcus, her son, is a teenager now. He was 4 years old the last time he saw his mother. And that is the 10th case. 10 people, 10 places across Indiana. Abby and Libby on a bridge in Delphi. Lauren Spearer, somewhere between a corner in Bloomington and an apartment that was 4 blocks away. Nikki McCown, somewhere between a village pantry in Richmond and a car that turned up in Dayton with her laundry folded inside it. Anne, Patricia, and Renee, somewhere in Lake Michigan or somewhere else entirely. 60 years of searching has not determined which. Karina McClurkin in a field in Miami County. Found after 6 years, with the man charged in her death acquitted and walking free. Denise Plum, on a gravel road in Fayette County, on Good Friday, 1986. Still out there somewhere, after nearly 4 decades, and 2 recanted confessions. Tricia Reitler, somewhere in Grant County, Indiana, with bloody clothes in a park, and a suspected serial killer who led investigators to an empty patch of ground near a reservoir and said she was there. Raina Rison at the bottom of a pond 2 miles from the clinic where she worked, with a conviction on the books and a book published in 2025 that says the conviction is wrong. Andy Wagner, somewhere between Evansville and a car in Indianapolis, with the keys still in the ignition. Larissa Sam, somewhere in Indianapolis or beyond it, with a 4-year-old son who is now a teenager, and a phone with the SIM card removed, and an uncle who died without ever answering the question everyone most needed him to answer. 10 cases, 10 places across Indiana, none of them finished. The next part will bring all of them together one final time, and then let them go unresolved, the way they actually are. Picture a flat Indiana highway in the middle of a Monday afternoon, corn on both sides, pavement stretching ahead. Nothing but blue sky and silence. Nothing obviously wrong. Nothing that would make you slow down or look twice. You have been here before. This is where we started with this highway, this light, this silence that does not announce itself as the silence of anywhere in particular. And it looks exactly the same as it did at the beginning. That is the point. That is the thing about Indiana, about all of it, about every location in this video, about every case that ends up on a list like this one. The roads do not change. The towns do not announce themselves as places where things went wrong. The Monon High Bridge Trail in Delphi looks like a trail. Downtown Bloomington looks like a college town. The Richmond Coin Laundry on Southeast Street looks like a laundromat. Indiana Dunes State Park looks like the most beautiful beach in the Midwest. A convenience store parking lot in Kokomo looks like a convenience store parking lot in Kokomo. There is nothing about any of these places that marks them as sites of something that never resolved. They do not carry their history on the surface. They just continue to exist, the way places always do, while the people who went missing from them remain missing, and the families of those people continue to live inside a particular kind of suspended time that does not move forward the way ordinary grief does. Go back through them one by one, not to summarize, not to arrive at a conclusion, just to hold them, briefly, before letting them go back to where they actually are, which is unresolved. Abby and Libby. The voice on the bridge said 3 words. It took 5.5 years to find the man who said them, and when they found him, he had been working at the local CVS the entire time, known to investigators from a 2017 interview, cleared and uncleared, and then finally arrested in 2022 and convicted in 2024. The case has a verdict 130 years in prison for Richard Matthew Allen. It is the only case on this list with a verdict, and even with a verdict, even with a conviction and a sentence and a man in prison, the community of Delphi has never fully returned to the place it was before February 13th, 2017. And still the image that remains is not the conviction, it is the photograph Libby took of Abby on that bridge, with the wide winter sky behind her and the old wooden planks stretching ahead, taken maybe 15 minutes before everything ended. That image does not change because a man went to prison. It stays exactly what it is. 2 girls on a trail on an ordinary Monday afternoon, and then everything that followed. Lauren Spearer. The shoes are still at Kilroy's in everyone's memory. A grainy surveillance frame at 2:27 in the morning, a tiny figure. No shoes, no phone, heading into the dark from the door of a bar, 4 to 5 blocks from her apartment. A well-lit street in a college town on a warm June night. And then nothing. 15 years and counting of nothing. No body, no charges, no explanation for what happened in those 4 or 5 blocks. The people who were with her that night lawyered up and went home for the summer. And Bloomington police took days to interview the people who lived closest to where she was last seen. The case is not cold, they say. 23 new tips in the past year. But Lauren Spearer has not been found, and no one has been charged. And the image that stays is the surveillance frame of her leaving Kilroy's tiny figure. No shoes, no phone, heading into a Bloomington street at 2:27 in the morning, and then nothing after that corner. Nikki McCown. The laundry was folded. Her car turned up 45 minutes from Richmond in a parking lot. 3 months later, battery gone, ignition tampered, door lock knocked in, and her laundry was inside, folded, as if she had finished an errand and put it away before something took her. The man who was indicted for her murder killed himself on the day the indictment came down. Her daughter Peyton started 3rd grade without her. Nikki is still officially listed as missing, not confirmed dead, which means the case file carries a faint technical possibility that has never actually existed in practical terms for the people who love her. Ann Miller, Patricia Blow, and Renee Bruhl. The beach was full. The lake was not. 3 sets of belongings on the sand towels, shoes, whatever they had brought for a summer Saturday beach trip, left behind on a beach that kept emptying out as the afternoon became evening and the park closed. 3 women entered Lake Michigan and did not come back. And a week of searching by police and the Coast Guard and volunteers produced nothing. And 60 years of intermittent investigation since then has also produced nothing. There is a man in a beach jacket on a small boat who may have spoken to them, or may have been on a completely unrelated errand on the lake that afternoon, and no one has ever been able to find out which. The tip lines are still open. Karenna McClurkin. Found, but no one convicted. Her skeletal remains in a field in Miami County, identified by DNA 6 years after she disappeared from a parking lot in Kokomo. Her grandmother, Jerry, who held her hand every time they said goodbye, and then spent 6 years demanding that someone take the case seriously. A man arrested, tried, and acquitted. The Kokomo Police Department says the investigation is active. Additional arrests were flagged as possible in 2022. None have come. Karenna has been found. No one has answered for it. Denise Pflum. He took the answer to his grave. Sean McClung confessed on his deathbed to killing her in Fayette County in 1986, and then told his lawyer before he died that the confession was a lie he had told to try to get out of jail before the end came. Her car was on Tower Road before the last confirmed sighting of her in town. Larry Hall's van had her newspaper clippings and her photograph alongside materials connected to at least a dozen other missing and murdered women across the Midwest. Her body has never been found. Her purse came home. She did not. Tricia Reitler. 6 or 7 people were playing basketball in a park 30 feet from where it happened on a Monday evening in March of 1993, half a mile from her dorm. Her bloody clothes in a field 100 feet off her route. A suspected serial killer who led investigators to the Mississinewa Reservoir and said she was buried there, and then nothing was found, and then the confession was recanted. 32 years have passed since that evening. Gary and Donna Reitler are still waiting. The dorm room Melissa was going to share with her sister stayed empty. Raina Ryson. A 14-year-old girl named Tracy found her at the edge of a pond off Range Road, covered by a log and branches. A month after she disappeared from the parking lot of the animal clinic, where she worked to pursue the future she wanted. A man convicted of her murder in 2014. A book published in 2025 that argues the wrong man is in prison. Her brother-in-law, who had abused her since she was 10 years old and threatened to kill her if she ever told anyone, and who was released from jail 10 weeks before she died, has never been charged with anything. The conviction stands. The book exists. They point in opposite directions, and the legal system has not resolved the contradiction. Andy Wagner. A car on Lyons Avenue in Indianapolis, 150 miles from where she was last seen. Window down, keys in the ignition, purse and phone and shoes inside. The phone's SIM card removed. Evidence collected from a property in Oakland City in May of 2024, sent to the state lab for testing. No public results, no arrests, no charges. Her mother came back from Texas to search for her and died before answers came. The $5,000 reward is unclaimed. Larissa Sam. A 4-year-old boy at his grandmother's house waiting for his mother on Father's Day morning, 2015. A gold Dodge Stratus backed into the driveway of an abandoned home in Mars Hill. Flat tire, window down, keys in the ignition, everything inside except the person who drove it there. An uncle who was the last person to see her and who died by suicide 2 years later. An American Idol audition 2 days away that she never made. Marcus is a teenager now. The map is on the table. 10 pins in Indiana. Carroll County, Monroe County, Wayne County, Porter County, Howard County, Fayette County, Grant County, LaPorte County, Vanderburgh County, Marion County. None of them moved. Go back to that highway now. Corn on both sides, pavement stretching ahead, blue sky and silence. The road does not know what happened on these cases. The road does not carry any of it. It just goes. That is the thing that stays with you after all of this. Not the individual details, though the details stay too. The folded laundry, and the shoes in the bar, and the voice on the bridge, and the basketball players who never came forward, and the deathbed confession, and the pill bottle in the van, and the car with the keys still in the ignition. All of those details stay. But the thing underneath all of them, the thing that connects every case on this list, is simpler than any single detail. People vanish in the real world. Not in horror movies, not in places that announce themselves as dangerous, not in circumstances that broadcast themselves as the circumstances under which terrible things happen. In laundromats on Sunday afternoons, on trails they have walked before, on the walk home from a grocery store, in parking lots, in cities, in small towns, in places that feel familiar and safe and ordinary, the way Indiana does when you are driving through it on a flat highway on a Monday afternoon, with corn on both sides and nothing in particular to worry about. And sometimes, not always, not even usually, but sometimes, more often than any of us would like to believe, nobody finds out why. The investigation runs out of actionable leads. The witnesses who could say something choose not to. The suspect dies before trial. The confession gets recanted. The evidence degrades. The years pass, and the case stays exactly where it is. The road goes. The silence holds. If you know anything about any of the cases in this video, contact the relevant law enforcement agencies. Links are in the description. None of these cases are closed.